Hello, hello. And
Hello.
me and Thomas are here to talk about our week with the WikiTree challenge. And of course, we did Jennifer Lopez. We did J.Lo for the week. So just going to kind of do just a really informal chat. And, it gives people that weren't able to participate in the week a chance to kind of see what we did. And, this will stay on YouTube so they can watch it later if they need to. So,
Yeah.
Thomas, how do you think the week went?
Well, all things considered, given that I think the majority of our members did not have very much experience with Puerto Rican research, with a couple notable exceptions, I think it went fairly well. Obviously, we didn't make that ideal connection through Jennifer's direct lines to the tree that we were hoping for, but we did a lot of expansion and we ended up building on a lot of areas that I was not expecting us to. So, for the most part, it was pretty successful week.
Yeah, I think it was too. And of course, we found out that all of us but one were related to Ben Affleck. So
Yeah.
we're all connected to J Lo through her current spouse. I
Hmm.
think Guillaume was the only one that was just a connection, connected by marriage, not connected by blood. So
Yeah.
but yeah, it was really unusual for me to go through the week and not have those connections. And I mean we do have Puerto Rican profiles on WikiTree, but not enough in the location that her family stayed. And they all pretty much seem to stay in Ponce.
Hmm.
Don't you agree? I mean that's
Yeah. No, just only a few exceptions to that rule. Immigrant lines, and then one line that ended up in Mayaguez, which we didn't get very far with. But
yeah.
oh, and then on the maternal side, there was a couple lines that went elsewhere, but I did not work on those lines, so I'm not altogether familiar with them.
Yeah, and we did have, luckily we're going out to the seventh degree now. We aren't just doing direct ancestors, which as genealogists, we're used to going out in that direct line, but this really opened up a lot of avenues for us. And of course, we had the four spouses of J Lo. And so that really helped a lot as far as giving us stuff to work on and making connections in other places. Uh, and it just didn't. Let me see. Let me go ahead and click on her family tree, though. I think we still did pretty good with the direct ancestors, though, because we really filled this out, at least minimally to the second great grandparents, and most of the lines go beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few lines went a couple generations or more back. We were just remarking before the show that we, like, right at the end of the challenge, we managed to pull up a couple records pertaining to the line that most recently came over from Spain, the Lopez, the paternal line, and all of that. And we're going through and continuing to find more records for siblings of the family that list potential, great, 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 great grandparents, and perhaps even further. So there's always more work to be done, of course, but I think
Always.
we really
And
did
I'm
do a
really
good job.
I'm really hoping this stirs enough interest that other people that are interested in the Puerto Rican ancestry, will add to these to see if it'll wind up matching with one of their branches, because I mean it may not really be that far that they have to go to
Hmm.
find a cousin match.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hopeful for that as well, and also especially with Spain. I think it wasn't all that long ago, only a couple months or something, but Salvador Dali had one of the largest unconnected branches on WikiTree. There were like some 600 profiles connected to his tree, and none of them connected to the main tree because Spanish research is very underrepresented on WikiTree. But hopefully that'll improve.
Right. And I've had people, they comment this every so often, but I had somebody comment again a couple of days ago about how WikiTree is so Americanized and we're very ethnocentric. And, it kind of appears that way, but you really have to stop and look at the evolution of WikiTree. It was started by Chris, and he is a United States citizen. And so, that's what he started with, him and his friends and his family. And they built what there was in the US. And then they started bringing in members and bringing in more people.
Yeah.
And so, because he's based in the US, that's where a lot of our membership expanded at. And now, I love seeing the projects that are growing. And we get people from Netherlands and Germany and other places come in. And I said, well, this just means that we need more people to give a shout out. It was Argentina. I said, talk to all your friends and family, get them to come to WikiTree, and then we'll have like this huge section of Argentine ancestors. That would be great. But, it's not like we are not expanding those. It's just that we haven't found a way to bring those people to WikiTree yet. And I mean, I would love to see these projects just
Yeah.
explode.
And I think that's, personally one of the main reasons why I use WikiTree so much is specifically because we keep, putting in work to make it more accessible. I think that really is one of the best things about our community here and all that. And so, looking
Right.
at, we're going to focus on this week of the challenge, but as you know, I'm very excited about next week, and I'm
I
happy
know.
to see all the work that's being done on the European Jewish lines, and particularly the additional
So
English
what
line.
do you think personally was like the biggest detractor? I mean, language obviously for the people that didn't speak Spanish, but we had enough people that we could, they could just put it in Discord and we could give them that missing bit of information that wasn't indexed. What the cause of death was, or no, those names are just grandparent or godparents. You don't need to worry about them. We could supply them with that, but beyond that, what do you think was like the hardest hurdle?
Well, there's the problem always with the naming customs being different from our own. How, you get you get individuals who all end up having the same name. Like we had a lot of repeated paternal and maternal surnames where you'd get, I'm just looking at the main line here, Juan Rodriguez or something like that. And there are probably at least 15 of those just in the little area that he was living in. As and that works with all areas of research, but in particular when we're relying on being able to identify those surnames as a way of finding more records, that caused
Right,
some
and
confusion.
staying within that tiny little area, so, it's not
Hmm.
like some of them grew up after they named their kids Rodriguez and then they moved away, they all just stayed there in Ponce pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. I don't think the language barrier was as difficult as it could have been. I don't think it was as difficult as we were expecting it to be.
Right,
So for the most part, I think a lot of it had to do with access to records and how good the indexes were in many cases,
yeah.
because there are relatively good indexes, but there were a lot of incorrect transcriptions of names, and then of course it was completely inconsistent in some of the records and things like that. And, that again, it's stuff that pops up all over the place, but when combined with the language barrier, it caused more of a problem.
Right. And, and even though Puerto Rico is part of the United States, their records are fashioned after like the Spain records or the Latin American records. So, yes, you do have the naming conventions where they use their father's and their mother's surname. And you do have the records in Spanish. And you do have pretty much the format of the Roman Catholic Church. And so, because of that, it's not the same as people that are experienced in the mainland United States records. It's not the same there, And I noticed, like with the indexes, they weren't really great at putting relationships. So
Hmm.
there'd be like these fabulous clues, and unfortunately, on some of them, I didn't catch it until the week was like ending or over, and I'm
Yeah.
like, quick, somebody go add parents, and they didn't realize that it was showing the paternal grandparents, the maternal grandparents, and then the godparents, and they just thought those were people that were there at the baptism. And, so there were probably a number of grandparents that could have been added using that information, but it wasn't indexed that way. They didn't say, oh, these are the godparents. And so if you didn't know that that's how the record was set up, you were kind of at a disadvantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And just remarking on, how they were changing the format and all that, that was one thing that surprised me right at the beginning of the week was I'd never seen it before, was looking at like the standard US Census schedule form, but everything's written in Spanish. Like, it wasn't so much of a surprise, but even still, it was
It
completely new to me. So it was kind
Yeah,
of funny.
it was unusual. You're used to seeing a US census that, yes, is filled out in English, so you're like, "Oh, okay, wait a minute."
Yeah, looking at all the relationship markers and everything, and having to reinterpret them.
Yeah, I did the same thing, don't feel bad. I was like, "Okay, let me make sure I'm checking the right column here."
Yep.
But, I think as far as the availability of the records, except for the fact that, we couldn't access all of the Ponce images, some of
Hmm.
it was just those indexes. I think availability of records was pretty good. You did find
Yeah.
census records, you did find the index baptisms, and so it really helped a lot with, finding who we were looking for.
And it varied. I That was something I meant to look into, but I didn't really get around to, was researching exactly when they started taking the records that were accessible, because there were some lines where it kind of just died out somewhere in the mid to late 19th century, and it's hard, like, were there records before that? Probably. Were they destroyed? Are they just not accessible? Like, yeah. And then we managed to build past a few generations anyway, just because all the baptismal records thankfully give us the grandparents,
I
which
know, thank
is
goodness. And I did
really.
notice though that, for the ones I looked at anyways, the families I looked at, it was more of the civil records as opposed to I'm used to seeing the church records,
Hmm.
for the baptisms. And so sometimes just a little bit different, how they set it up and just a little bit of difference in the terminology. But, the nice thing was that we had a lot of forms. So there was type stuff for, you don't
Hmm.
have to worry quite as much about reading somebody's, horrible records. But, like I was looking, helping somebody, and the person they were working on had 5 children, and they did really good with the father's name, but the mother's surname was spelled different in all 5 of the records. So
Oh
you were
yeah.
like, okay, so what do I think is the closest to what she actually was?
Was
You
that
know,
Aloyo or was that another one?
no, it was on the Lopez line,
Oh,
and
okay.
they had her as Santi, which I at first I looked at and thought maybe Santiago.
Oh yeah.
But if you look at it, it's all just a version of like Santi or Santi, whatever it was.
Santi,
Um,
Santia,
so
Santisa.
I'm
Yeah.
still waiting. Yeah, I have it on the list for Kathy. God love her for, I love her for all the records she looks up for us. But even though the week's over, I want to see the actual baptisms and just see if that was a poor interpretation when they
Yeah.
transcribed it.
I want to see those as well. That was the big thing, was on that Lopez line. When you get back to Spain, suddenly there aren't any digitized scans to find it all.
Yeah.
It's a little bit annoying, but
And
yeah.
then we did have, I'm going to go ahead and pop my screen up here again.
All right.
We did have some interesting finds this week, just not as many of them, which once again, anytime we have the ancestors where they're all foreign locations, we don't get as many of the interesting finds just because we don't have newspapers necessarily available that the researchers can read. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you don't read Spanish, it really doesn't do you any good to go look at a newspaper because that's definitely not going to be indexed. And
Yeah.
so, for the first find we had, and once again, our connections that are by blood are all blood related to Ben, and but they are because of that they're indirectly connected to J.Lo. And we had his great grandparents, Alan Byers and Dorothy Elizabeth McGuire Byers, took a trip on a ship, the Western Prince, from Santos, Brazil to New York in 1931. The trip took about 2 weeks. Thank you for finding that, Nancy. And it just makes you wonder, were they just doing kind of a fun cruise or what was it that they were doing? Um, and then, she has information on, I mean, if you look at what their life was, pretty quiet, living in Ohio. Some of the kids were born in New Jersey. So that, would be a real step outside of their realm of existence, what they were used to. That's kind of cool that they took that trip. And then we had Ben Affleck's great grandmother had 2 sisters. So we had Margaret McGuire and then Louise McGuire Renfrew, who married two brothers. So the two McGuire sisters married the two Renfrew brothers, Reno and Charles. And, you do see that from time to time. It's really not that uncommon, but it's definitely interesting. And, to
Mhm.
look at the family dynamics of that. And, one of the things that I saw too that somebody had mentioned in Discord that I hadn't really thought about as much, but we always look at consanguinity or pedigree collapse where, you wind up with two sets of great grandparents in the same tree and but just on different branches if you do have wind up having people married and they married later on. And they were saying that they actually put that as a section on the profile. And I thought, I'm really huge on putting research notes and what I found and everything, but it's never dawned on me to put that as a really obvious statement, because when you are looking and you're not looking at like the whole fan chart, you're just kind of flipping through a line, it's not going to be obvious
Mhm.
immediately on a lot of those that you do have those duplicate sets of great grandparents or grandparents. And so that was kind of smart that they did that. And I'm going to try and remember to do that now when I work
Yeah,
on those
and
slides.
especially when
But
you've got these really common names like Rivera and things like that, where there's no guarantee that they're going to be related just because they have the same name.
I know, says Mindy Silva, because
Yeah.
that is like Smith, but in Portugal. So yeah.
Yeah.
Top use surname. But yeah, just because the surname matches does not mean they are related. So it is a good idea, and if you don't want to put it in its own section, do put it down on the research notes and mark it on the profile, because, you're saving somebody else some time so they're not, having to discover the same thing. And then the third one, and this was added by Kathy, and this was about Jennifer. So we have Jennifer Garner, who, of course, was Ben's ex spouse and his ex wife, and her maternal great aunt, Antonia Rivera, is listed as being 104 years old. Now, of course, she was only 97 because we're genealogists and we just don't accept when they say somebody was this age. We want to go look at, but the baptism actually showed that she was born in 1887. And so she definitely was 97 years old and not 104, but that's still really cool. And here, see, she did the same thing, put it in the research notes so that if you don't notice it right away when you go to her profile, you know that that birth date and that age was incorrectly reported. And it's not necessarily that anybody lied, but you have to look at who the informant was on the death certificate. And, it may be like a son in law or somebody like that that doesn't know the age for real. And they're like, I think it's this, It's not necessarily that the person went around saying that they were a different age.
Yeah. And wasn't that also on Jennifer Lopez's line, not Garner's? Or
Yes.
yeah. I was just glancing at Jennifer Garner's tree because I did not look at it at all.
We had several people that worked on those lines.
Yeah.
No, the maternal, yeah, that was her maternal great aunt. So
Okay.
on the mother's side, I was thinking it was on Jennifer's father's side, but it was on the mother's side. And then this one, if you want to go ahead and tell us about this guy
Yeah,
and where
and
he
I
came
actually
from.
just edited it to add a couple other ones because we found a couple records for Jennifer Lopez's fourth great grandfather, who I believe was Juan Garcia, and it's all the records where it's just mentioning him as the grandfather of a child who was baptized, but they explicitly describe him as being from Canarias, which was the Canary Islands territory of Spain time. And we went looking to see if we could find any records from the Canary Islands to help identify him or where his ancestors were from or anything like that. And unfortunately, to no avail. But we did find a few lines on the tree that ended up leading us away from Puerto Rico. And so this was one of them. And I just added the note, of course, the Lopez line we managed to identify from Lugo in, I believe, what area of Spain was it in?
Andalusia, right? Lugo.
No, Galicia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and uh, Oh, the other one, which I don't think we actually marked on the proper profile, but Guillaume found a tie between the Ginorio line and Corsican France, which he was talking about in our chat, which seemed very
Right.
interesting. I wish we had it typed up somewhere. I might have to
Yeah,
go in and add that.
that didn't make it to our interesting find section, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it's anyway, so it's interesting to be able to find those lines of immigration, which we weren't fully expecting to as we were going into it. And especially on the Lopez line, to be able to trace it a few generations further beforehand was a welcome surprise.
Yeah. And here we had another one on Jennifer's side, and this is a grand uncle. And Felix and his wife, Cecilia, had two sets of twins who did not survive. So, I just can't imagine that kind of tragedy. It always makes me sad when you see these families that, they lose a number of their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it gets so much more common the further back you get, and it's really.
I know, and in 1933, you're already getting to the age of where we have better medical care, and so I think it's a little more surprising to see it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, back in the 19th century, it was really common. You didn't really expect all of your children to live to adulthood because they didn't have the vaccinations and they didn't have all the medications that they have nowadays. And, it was just more of a common thing. But I think in the 1930s, not as common, although twins are always in more of a danger
Yeah,
than a single birth.
it's true.
And then here we went over to back to Ben's side, and this was his great grandmother's sister, Rachel Perkins Conant. And this one says she did live to be 100. And so this is actually not a profile that was created during the challenge. And it's one of the things we do like is when we find these branches and we can connect to them. And then, of course, everything somebody's added after them adds this big number, where now you have all these people connected to cousins that they weren't connected to before. But
Mm-hmm.
this profile was created in 2016, and this lady lived to be exactly 100 years old in Rhode Island. And so I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a nice thing seeing all those connections that were being made on the other spouses' lines and all of that. Especially we started off the week having absolutely nothing on Ben Affleck's mother's family, and so I'm glad we got some people to go in and work on.
Yeah, and we wound up with what, like 838 connections or something. So,
Yeah, something like
there's,
that.
I mean, we only had 50 direct ancestors to J.Lo. So if we would have only been doing her side, we still would have wound up with 100 or 100 plus people. But yeah, to push it up over 800 because we were able to explore these other relationships and spouses really helped us a lot.
Yeah.
Now we have Ben Affleck's grandfather, William O'Brien Bolt, and he was an anti nuclear weapons activist. He spent 6 months in a work camp in 1941 for being a conscientious objector. And so, there's articles and whatnot on him about his beliefs and his time spent in jail. He did marry Elizabeth Neely Robert Shaw, and it looks like we only have two children. I'm not sure if that's because he only had two children or if we just didn't find enough records to add the rest. We kind of, it kind of hurts us when we get out to the era where we're worried that the children might still be living. And
Yeah.
so, if they might be living, we don't add them on WikiTree to protect their privacy.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of stuff. I mean, here we're talking about occupations, and of course he served in the army. He was editor for Regional Plan Association of New York. He was an analyst on the staff of the Philadelphia City Planning Commission, and a freelance writer, a lecturer. He just did all of these great things. But of course, what you do, that one negative item that people don't agree with is what's going to get you in the papers,
Hmm.
not the 10 or 15 really great things that you did that helped your
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, and that was So on that line, I know we mentioned it a couple times on calls. This was not really expanded upon within the tree, which is kind of a shame. I think because we were focusing so much on Jennifer's side of the family, we didn't get any Germany project members to come in and work on the Bolt line, which could have been a big help. But I know that there's a story that was circulated a few years back that we did not touch upon about his grandfather, Heinrich Bolt, who apparently at the age of 12 happened upon a big like archaeological find that no one had seen before. It was this ancient disc that dated back to, I believe, time of Harald Bluetooth or one of the major Nordic kings and all of that, and had an inscription on it from there. And so there was some interesting story connected to that didn't make it.
Yeah,
That's
and
one
that
thing. About us working on the 7 degrees of connection and all that as well is, we have so much more room, and so there's so much more that also doesn't get touched upon. So
I know, and the week just goes so fast for
it
us.
really
I
does.
mean, we start and we're like, oh, I've got all the time in the world to find these people and add them and connect. And, Thursday morning comes up and you've only got a few more hours left and you're like, where'd the week go?
Yeah.
It's really hard to get everything done and make all the connections. But yeah, I think it would have been fun if we would have had some people come in and try and expand those German lines so that we would could see definitely where they came from. And Elaine was pointing out some information, and definitely a notable living descendant, just not enough to meet the WikiTree standards. But make sure you take a look at William Bolt's profile and see what kind of interesting information is on there, because there is a lot. He was a very, very interesting person.
Yeah. See.
And then the final one, this was on Jennifer's side also, and a cousin. So Dolores Robles Rivera and her brother Domingo got married on the very same day, and it kind of makes you wonder if they were just trying to do that for financial reasons, because those ceremonies are very expensive,
Oh
and
yeah.
putting everything together for the families and whatnot. And or if it was, I don't know, they just were really close and thought, oh, it's be really fun to share our marriage day. But the great thing is you'd never forget their anniversary. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. Elaine also mentions that the living descendant should get more famous. Maybe in a few years we can make him visible on the site.
I know that would be great. We'll
Yeah.
root for it, Elaine. We'll root for it.
Yeah, no, they really were expensive at that time, especially because you had to pay a rather large sum just to get the marriage certificate from the church, usually at that time period, the Catholic Church, and so it gets all the more complicated and everything. So with all the expenditures, it probably was the main reason. But
Yeah, and I don't know about the culture there, but I know in other cultures, and like if you look at the Portuguese culture, there is a very definite, specific expectations list for, say, a baptism. And I had somebody mention, they commented on that the other day about how the parents were married after the first child was born. But the United States is one that we find that still, not as shocking as it used to be, but it used to be considered just shocking that your children were born out of marriage. But in other countries, it isn't. I
yeah,
mean, some countries, they just don't expect it at all. You may marry, you may not marry. It's not a requirement. And we saw that with the WikiTree challenge last year in searching other countries where it wasn't required. But in places like Portugal, and maybe they did wind up with the wife getting pregnant, or they just really were ready for children. They had to decide, well, do I want this baptism that's going to be really expensive, or do we want the marriage that's going to be really expensive?
yeah,
And they'd go, you know what, let's do the baptism first and we'll save money for the marriage. But it was culturally acceptable to do that. It wasn't a big, huge deal. So where, we have a tendency to look at it and go, oh my gosh, they had, two children before they actually got married. And I find, I know in the Portuguese research I've done, it's usually only one. But it happens a lot. It's not
Yeah.
a shocking thing. It's just that, you kind of have to look at your priorities and which one you want to handle financially. So
Yes. No, it is a really interesting, set of variations between different nations and all of that. I know I was fascinated when I first started working on Dutch research that you find records that explicitly refer to like a person who's getting married, but it mentions their birth status as having been legitimized by the parents marrying after the birth. And in some countries that was an option. In other countries, they would be listed as illegitimate regardless of whether the parents all
right.
married. It's interesting seeing how each region has its own variation in that.
And once again, though, I mean, on WikiTree, this is what's great about it, because you're not going to go to one of the other sites. I'm not going to name them. You're not going to go to them and learn about somebody else's culture or record keeping. I can add all of the Spanish people I want to my ancestors' branches on this other site, and nobody's going to come in and go, "Oh, hey, Mindy, have you tried this resource?" Or you might want to look at the naming conventions before and go back and fix that profile. But on WikiTree, you have those opportunities everywhere, to where you can talk to other people that are really familiar with it, and you can learn from it and step outside your comfort zone. And especially within the challenge, we definitely do that.
Yes.
And I do want to give a quick kudos, because we didn't have as many brick walls again solved, but once again, there was so much work that was also done on the other lines. And so on Ben's lines and Jennifer's lines, and there weren't as many people that were expanding J.Lo's. But I do want to say that two of the brick walls that were broken and that got bounty points were not even participants. So that was exciting, because we say you can register or not. If you forgot to register, or you didn't have time to register, or you found out about the week too late and they've already started and you want to jump in and help, we encourage you jump in and help. And if you don't know a lot about the records, there's people that can help you with them, or you can go through and just add categories or add stickers, or just cheer people on in Discord. Hey, way to go, great find. There's plenty that people can do. And we do have some amount of people that just aren't as big as signing up, or maybe just don't like their badges that much. Most of us like our badges, but not everybody does. But yeah, they're definitely can come in and help at any time. But I did think it was interesting that, by Thursday morning, and I was checking bounty points, there were 3 brick walls down at that point, and 2 of them were for non-challenge participants.
Yeah.
So it only showed up as 10 points on the score sheet, but really there should have been more.
Yeah, no, I always forget to sign my name on the registration page and all of that, and so I think some of the time you've just carried my name over from the previous week. I'm not sure if that's the
Well,
case or
the
not,
way we
but
set it up this year, because we did it last year, and of course we did a challenge almost every single week last year.
yeah.
And we were doing registration for every week or every month. And so, like, when August came in, you needed to be badged for that month. And, it just became a thing of creating way too many badges, in that little tiny portion of the server, where if you're somebody that can award badges, you've already got this massive list to pick from. It was just creating big batches of badges, and it was also causing problems. So if somebody thought they signed up, but they put the comment somewhere else, maybe they said in Discord, "Oh, I'm joining in," and I didn't think to look them up. I went, "Oh, cool, you're joining us. I'm happy about it." And then they weren't signed up for the week, so they didn't show up on the page. Or maybe the bot pulling the record hadn't updated yet that day, and so people were not understanding why their name was on. And the way we did it this year is, once you've signed up, you're signed up. You'll get your points once you've signed up for the challenge once. The difference it makes is the people that get the email. So if you want the email update saying, "Okay, we picked the brick walls," or, "I need somebody to work on this," or, "Hey, great job," if you want to get those emails, you do need to go onto that post and say, "Hey, I'm registered."
Yeah, that's on me. I just haven't been checking on it all the time, but that's, yeah, I
See
think
how you are.
I think we're I think we're doing a very good job of keeping things running this year, though. I think your
Yeah.
workload is probably much improved now that we've switched to this system, and so we're
Yeah.
able to have a good organizational structure, which I think is beneficial to everyone involved.
Yeah,
Mm.
and I mean the challenge went really well last year. It was incredible. I never stopped being amazed at how well everybody did every week. And it didn't seem to matter what we threw at the WikiTreeers, new countries, this, that, different naming conventions. They just would just dive in there and get these amazing results anyways. But we did take a hard look at the things that were creating more work that weren't really necessary for the challenge, and we did streamline a lot of that. So it definitely evolved this year, and it made me happy because some of it was just really repetitive, tedious work.
Yeah. Uh, just a brief side note. I want to say hello to John Tyner, who just joined us. I think he was at his niece's sending away party earlier today, so I hope that went well. We're on the morning live chat earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's going to be interesting seeing what else we can come up with in the next few weeks. I know we are having our last actual live guest this next week, which is
I know.
that's
And I do his interview Monday. So, not only are we doing the last one that's going to be a live guest, but he wanted it done really super close to the start of the week. So when I was doing live guests before, I liked them to give me a couple of weeks so that I could, get everything together and put the interview information where people could find it and kind of keep that organized and tracked. But he really needed it close. So I won't have any information from him from the interview until until Monday, later in the day, Monday. But I will put that on the space page for you guys, that are looking forward to starting this week. And I am excited that we're doing, another live person. This will be fun.
yeah.
But definitely, I had to do some specific recruiting for the Russian Jewish records. And I tried to steal you, of course, for the whole week, but you couldn't take the week off. So,
Have you managed to find someone yet?
yeah, we actually have like 28 people signed up now.
Oh, I mean specifically to captain the week. I know we got
Oh, to captain the
researchers.
week? No. No,
Well,
I do have one captain that, is being really gracious and said, if somebody else doesn't really want to do the week, she'll do it. But I just kind of feel bad because I've already asked her for so much recently. And so I'd really like to hit somebody else up. So if you're watching and you want to captain the week, you don't have to know about the Russian records because we have a lot of people that have come in after the recruiting was done, and some of them will research, but some of them, oh, that is a good idea.
yeah.
Lewis Kessler, I didn't think to get a hold of him, but some of them are just going to come in like on a consulting basis. So if you need a record translated, you just go to them and they'll translate it. And so we should have actually quite a bit of help. This will be
Yeah.
our first Russian Jewish ancestral line. So
Yeah, that's right. I think there was only one person with Jewish heritage we worked on over the last 2 years, and it was all Dutch, wasn't it?
no, we had
Oh, we
three.
had Lewis as well. Lewis was
Yeah.
also a guest. That's
And
right.
we had AJ Jacobs who had Jewish lines, and then there was another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did have several that had the Jewish lines. And so, that was like our first, and some of them were fairly close together. So that was some of our first experiences for some of us in, the JRI Poland site, which is a
Yeah.
godsend. And then learning to look around on a few of the other sites that were available for Jewish records. I couldn't read the actual documents or the tombstones or anything, but I can look and see if it looked like it was the right child with the right parents, and then, have somebody look at the image and tell me if I was correct or not. So that was really super helpful. Yeah, Melanie McComb also had Jewish lines. We had
Oh,
several right in a row that
okay.
that did, but they weren't like all Jewish.
All right.
And here with Scott, it's going to be 100% Russian Jewish lines.
Yeah, it
So
is. Speaking of, I'm coming to y'all from the library right now. That's right by me, and I went through and decided to check out a couple books in preparation for the week. I managed to find a book that is a set of memoirs by a woman who grew up in one of the towns we've identified part of Scott's family is coming from. It's called Babruisk in Belarus. And so I'm going to read this over the next few days. And just for fun, I'm not expecting to find any
Yeah.
genealogically relevant information, but I
That's
think
still really cool, though.
it'd be
You know,
interesting.
and it's still, though, that's nice if you can find historical information that relates to the lifespan of one of the ancestors, because those are things, whatever she's experiencing, chances are a lot of them would be things that other people in her community were as well. So, really,
Absolutely.
really fascinating. Yeah.
And that was the other thing that we're going to mention it during the kickoff. I don't want to go too in deep into all of these things, but one of the most wonderful resources I know of when looking up that sort of contextual information for Jewish ancestry is that for many towns throughout Europe, there are these things called Yizkor books or memorial books, which were written by survivors of the Holocaust from those towns about the history and like folklore of the area. And many of those have all been translated, at least in part, on Jewish Gen and are easily accessible. So
Right.
for any town that we identify, we should look for those.
And there's another site. I can't, maybe you'll know what it is. I can't remember what it was, but we looked, I know, when we did a few of those Jewish lines, and it was the interviews with the people that survived the camps, and you could go there, and same thing, you could do a search for them and pull up their interview and see what kind of questions they asked them about, the people that lived, the people that didn't live, stuff like that. Some of them actually had the text interviews where they talked about what happened. And, of course, that stuff was all heartbreaking. It just, you could only do so much at one time, and you kind of had to step away and, go to your happy place for a little bit
Yeah,
and, and then go back to it.
I think that was probably through Yad Vashem. That's the main resource for those sorts of materials, although there are a few.
But yeah, and and that's another thing is people with resources. And once again, we all learn from each other, and what we know benefits everyone, or it should. And so, if you have any particular resources that might help people during the week, definitely do put it on Scott's space page. And once the week starts, I will link that in the G2G post. Right now, it's just a recruiting post. But once the week starts, I will link that there. And of course, it'll be linked in Discord to get to the space page. And that way, if there's a resource that it might help somebody else find their answers also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, Eric. Eric made it.
Hello, Eric. Hello, Nordic Project member. Need to do some Nordic research at some point soon. It's been a while. Anyway, yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. I'm very happy to know that we have. So the week starts next Thursday,
Right.
right? Yeah, Elaine was
Yes.
just asking. So we'll have our usual chats at noon and 8 o'clock. Yeah, sorry, getting used to a new time zone still.
Yeah.
Uh,
And and have people like Thomas there that can explain a little bit about about any naming conventions or anything. Oh, and one thing I did want to bring up, and this will get brought up when we start his week and we do the Zoom kickoffs, but there we were talking a little bit behind the scenes about the language that the naming fields are in. And on WikiTree, we want it to be the language they spoke at that time, that actual person spoke. But we know that people that are English speaking only, or any other language that isn't Russian speaking, you aren't going to necessarily know how to do that. But so, what I'd like everybody to do is put the English name in there if that's what you're comfortable using and that's what your, experience is. And then we'll have some people that are experienced into translating that information into Russian. But when that does get translated, it will be still noted in the biography section
yeah.
in English, so that you can still go to it and go, oh, that is so and so's profile. We don't want to make the profile so inaccessible that we go and we don't know whose profile it is. But that will be one of the things that we'll be addressing. And yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I've been so I think, of course, always having a profile is better than having none at all. So
Yeah.
really having profiles in English is always perfectly fine, even if we're trying to make a move toward making that switch.
Right.
I will probably spending a lot of my time going through and adding Yiddish translations and things like that, because that is some area of mild expertise for myself, but we'll see
Right.
what it looks like. But what I've been doing with a lot of the profiles is continuing to add the English as like other last name in that field, because I know that at least with the WikiTree B extension, you can search by the other last name field as well. And so that'll still come up for WikiTree users who use that. And so, anything to make it more accessible. But as long as the English text is somewhere, it should
Yeah.
work just fine.
Yeah. And I'm just really excited, that we're going into this new location, and I can't wait to see what everybody finds.
Yeah, the same here. I'm hoping that we can identify some more specific locations, because I know for three of Scott's grandparents, we have like the Minsk or the Kiev Governorate, which are gigantic regions that family could have been from anywhere. That doesn't really help us identify anything at all. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping we'll get a little bit more specific. But I'm glad that we found one line with the Epsteins, where we have a specific town of Bobroisk, and hopefully we'll find more. It's one thing that'll be a little bit of a roadblock, is accessing Illinois records, because Illinois is one of the worst places to request records from, and
Yeah.
not everything is digitized.
Yeah.
But
Unfortunately. That's always so frustrated, because we've gotten so used to so many people having their records online now. And then you hit a location like that and you're like, why? Why can't you just give her the times like everybody else? I want to look at the record books.
yeah, and so I know a bunch of Scott's family is all buried in the exact same cemetery, which is in Forest Park, I believe, outside of Chicago, the Waldheim Cemetery. But and a lot of the records there do have photos attached to them. Most of the ones in his family don't, which is not helpful, because Jewish
Yeah.
gravestones are an incredible resource. But thankfully, we do have
Yeah.
it for those paternal grandparents. So
Yeah.
hopefully that'll
Do
get
you
us
do
started.
you happen to have a one handy that you can pull up and show people?
Yeah, I think I do. Give me 1 second.
I really do love the amount of information on them.
Yeah, it really is impressive. Here we go. This, I believe, is his grandmother. Um, it's not the lengthiest inscription, but I will pull it up. Let me see. Share screen. Does that work? Okay.
Thinking about it.
Can you see that?
There we go.
Yes. So here, this is a gravestone for Scott's grandmother, Fanny Tervetsky. We see all the English inscription and all of that. As we scroll down to the bottom, so one of the big things on Hebrew or Yiddish inscriptions on gravestones is there are a lot of abbreviations that are used. So broadly speaking, at the top it says "Here lies" is that first line, and that's actually the abbreviated form. And then it gives her name as Feni, which is probably not her original name. I know you and I were discussing this a couple days ago. Uh, Fanny is very common among Jewish immigrants to the US. It almost always is an anglicization of either Feiga or Feigl.
Mhm.
We don't know for certain which one it is. So for the moment, she's listed as Fanny on her line. But it says Fanny Bat Reb David. And that just means Fanny, daughter of Mr. David, essentially. That's what that actually touches upon one big misconception that a lot of people have about graves. I think I even saw this once expressed on Finding Your Roots, that this letter in the center here, it's the symbol for R. It has what looks like an apostrophe after it, and remember, it's read from right to left. It's short for Reb a lot of people think that means rabbi. It does not. It is just a simplistic honorific, and that is something that I see published in a lot of places by people who have not done their research. So that, and then below that, it says the date, which is in the Jewish calendar, which means that it's not direct conversion. So you have to go through and identify each of the numbers. And so that's a little bit complicated. I will admit Jewish dates are not my expertise whatsoever, but thankfully Jewish Gen has a whole resource page that lets you interpret it. So
Right.
that is not too difficult. And then the very last line, it's another abbreviation. It's for a longer phrase that translates to "May their soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life," I believe, which is a prayer that is listed on almost every Jewish faith.
Right. And another thing we talked about was one, and and this is understandable. It's not like we're saying anybody's done anything wrong, but there was a name that came up, and on other sites it listed the father as having the name David. And some of that comes from them saying, this person, Ishmael, son of David, on the tombstone or on records, and not understanding that
Mm-hmm.
that part is son of David. And they're like, oh, he has David in his name. Okay. And so they put that in there as like a middle name. And, once again, it's understandable if they aren't used to researching in that area. But definitely, you want to make sure that, somebody's helping you with that translation so that you're only pulling their actual name out of the results.
Yeah. No, I think things will go fairly smoothly for the most part. We're going to go over a lot of this information at the kickoff, of course,
Right.
as we've said. But it is a different format. It is a different system. We're going to try to use Yiddish as much as possible because that was the language spoken by these people. It depends on region. Most people were bilingual in Yiddish and Russian, but Yiddish really is the language of the Ashkenazi population. And so it's going to be a different system. We are going to use, for the most part, Russian naming conventions for WikiTree, which means that we're going to be listing the patronym as a middle name, which is
Right.
not always what every project wants you to do. Like, for instance, when you get to the Nordic countries and all that, we explicitly tell people, don't do that.
Yeah.
But in this case, it does make the most sense. And then there's a whole history of how Ashkenazi Jews ended up with surnames in the first place, which we could talk for hours. I
Yeah.
could talk for hours about that at least. I've done a lot of research into
Well,
it.
so everybody watch for the Zoom meeting to come out at our usual times on Thursday at noon and at 8 p.m. Eastern so that we can talk a little bit more and focus on what these different things are that we need to know to start our week out and be successful. And, I want to thank everybody for working so hard on J.Lo's week. It was just really amazing to have everybody there. And, I hope you can join in too, even if you decide that you're not going to be doing any research for Scott's week, jump into Discord. You know how nice it is to, just have people around that are talking to you and appreciating that you're getting something done. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up for now, but really, really super great week with
Yeah, it's wonderful.
J.Lo and, well, oh wait, I can't end it, Thomas.
Oh, what?
We didn't do the cousins.
Oh,
We got so busy talking about everything. I
yep.
know, I'm
All right.
terrible. I'm like, well, everybody, I'm gonna go home now for the day. We're done. Okay, bad Mindy.
Easy to
So
get
yeah,
distracted.
you can all give me a hard time about this later. We did. We got so caught up in talking about Scott stuff. I forgot that we were going to look at this, but we really wanted to. And once again, for J.Lo, it's going to be all connections by marriage. And we love that feature where you can go into the categories and say, how am I related? Or you can put somebody else's wiki ID in and go, okay, how is J.Lo related? And hers are going to be by marriage because we have not yet connected her by blood to the global tree. But there were some fun ones. So several of this family actually made it. But we have Summer Phoenix, who is an actress and a musician. She runs a vintage clothing boutique, and she's married to the actor Casey Affleck.
Yeah.
And Summer is only 3 degrees away from J.Lo.
And I think I got a couple points because I was working on her great grandparents who were Jewish in preparation for the next week. So that's one of the one, again, 7 degrees of connection works well.
Yeah,
Goes a
adding
long
ahead of
ways.
time. And then we have Rain Bottom, and that's Rain Bottom Phoenix, also a child of Johnny Lee Bottom and Hart Dunette's Phoenix. And this one is an American actress, musician, and singer. So, a lot of talent out in those branches. And for that connection, it's only one step further. So that would be Rain Phoenix is 4 degrees from J.Lo, and it shows you the path where it's swapped over by marriage. Another interesting one here is Adele Maria Austerlitz, and she was born in 1896, and she's actually the sister of Fred Astaire. And so she is notable in her own right and does have her own WikiTree or Wikipedia page, but also, another one where there's a lot of talent in that family, sister of Fred Astaire, and he was
Uh,
crazy talented. And for this one, it's 15 degrees from Jennifer Lopez, which is closer than what I am at my 22 degrees. So,
yeah, exactly. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah.
and then another one, of course, most of us recognize the name for is Johnny Cash, and born in 1932, and definitely, known as the Man in Black. He was a veteran, but of course, known for his stage name um, as Johnny Cash instead of John. And for the connection, that one is 20 degrees from Jennifer Lopez. I'm still further. Everybody's going to be everybody's going to be closer than me. And here, just for fun, I had to look at this one because, as WikiTreeers, we love seeing our connections. And so this one is to Thomas Jefferson, who, of course, was the president of the United States. He was our third president. He has a really wonderful profile. And she is 14 degrees from Thomas Jefferson, following along 4 different branches. Of course, where it goes from yellow to green or green to yellow, it means there was a switch due to marriage. But that was kind of interesting, that we couldn't get her connected directly globally yet, but through these matches, she is connected by marriage. And then, of course, Humphrey Bogart is another one that most people recognize the name, even if they weren't somebody that watched his movies and whatnot. And, there's some really great information and images on his profile. Casablanca, that's one of the classics. And for that one, J.Lo is 16 degrees. So here, it was on 8 branches, which means it definitely hot by marriage a lot.
Yeah.
It went this person and then the spouse and then maybe the sister. That one moved around a lot. And for the final one, um,
Fred.
Fred
Yeah.
Astaire. You have to have good old Fred here. This was really fun, and I think most of us know. It looks like his biography needs a little bit of work, though.
Yeah.
But amazing picture. And Fred Astaire, I'm going to do relationship to me, none. I was related to most of the rest of them. Oh, 19 degrees. So we're related by marriage, but we are not related by blood.
Yeah.
And then for J.Lo to Fred Astaire, of course, was 16 degrees on a number of different branches. But it was just really fun, to look at the cousin
Yeah.
connections and see. Thomas, who's your favorite person that you're connected to, or do you have a favorite on WikiTree?
Oh,
That's a hard
it's
one.
always a difficult question. No, I mean, I'm very fond of my own family, but yeah, there's connections all over the place. I have an aunt who's from Algeria who I've been working on trying to connect all of her branches to the tree, and so there are lines that end up in Spain and France and within Arabia and all of that. And so I'm really I tend to be more interested in studying all of the the less notable people, the folklore aspects of genealogy more than the big celebrities. But
Yeah.
it's always fun finding those stories, and I know that there's going to be a good bit of this sort of thing as well with all the cousin connections when we work on Scott's lines as well, because that is a humongous thing in Jewish research. You get really anywhere in the US outside of New York and big cities like that. And every single person in an individual Jewish community is going to be related to everyone else through marriage in some way or another. And so
Right.
it's a small world sometimes. So it's going to be
Yeah,
interesting
it
seeing that.
certainly is.
And I
And I
know we
think,
already, oh, yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know that we already identified he has an uncle who is married to a famous psychologist. And so hopefully we can work on her lines as well. And that might have a higher chance of being able to connect to the tree. We'll see.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So this time we'll wrap it up for real. I thank you for coming and joining me and Thomas for our hour of chatter. And thanks again, everybody, for working on the WikiTree challenge.
Thank you.